Okay, why don't we get started? So welcome to all of you to Ignite a Prospecting Culture with Salesforce CRM. And I'm especially delighted to have two incredible guests with us today. Mike Clayville, who's the Vice President of North America Sales for VMware, and Sandiland, who's a Senior Corporate Strategist with Dell. And what we're going to talk about today is the importance of building a prospecting culture and how Salesforce.com can be a part of that effort. And let's start by having a quick show of hands. Let me see how many folks in here are from sales. Raise your hand. Wow. Okay, and marketing? Vastly underrepresented. Not a big surprise. So those of you that are in sales, let me ask this question. How many of you believe that the answer to growing your top line is more leads? Not too many. Not surprising. I was audited today, and I didn't realize that I was being audited. I got my results. So there's a company here that essentially submitted an inquiry to all of the partners' websites that are exhibiting in the expo. And they wanted to measure the speed at which they got a response from those leads. And salespeople notoriously aren't particularly good at responding to leads in a reasonable amount of time. And it turns out that 75% of the inquiries that were submitted didn't get any response whatsoever. Zero. We luckily were ranked 14th out of 170. Of those that did respond, the average response time was 13 hours, and we had a response time of 45 minutes. So I called my VP of sales this morning, and I said, hey, we were 14th, and response time was 45 minutes, and he jumped on me. He said, that's terrible. We have a 10-minute SLA, right? So I was calling to give him some good news, but in fact, his expectations were substantially higher. And so it's no surprise to me that this audience is heavily represented by sales, because building a prospecting culture is so important, because most leads don't get a response, and there's a lot of reasons for that, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But to build a prospecting culture requires some change, and it requires some heavy lifting. It's not the easiest thing to do. And let's talk about change for half a second. Let me get everybody to stand up. Okay. One of the great things about this event is that I feel like I'm having Christmas early, right? I got a glimpse into the future yesterday morning, another glimpse into the future this morning, all these great introductions. And as I think about Christmas, it always makes me think of New Year's, not just the party stuff, but the New Year's resolutions that everybody, or some people, tend to make. And New Year's resolutions are an interesting thing. And let me ask this question. Has anybody never made a New Year's resolution that's in this audience? One person? A couple people? Okay, go ahead and sit down. Okay. Those of you that have made them, how many of you were unable to keep that resolution for more than 30 days? Unable to keep it for more than 30 days. Okay, sit down. 60 days? 90 days? 6 months? A year? Okay, congratulations to those of you that are still standing. Please sit down. So out of the 200 or so people that are in this room, about 5 were able to stick with the resolution for more than a year. And if you ask just about every CEO today what their number one priority is, it's growth, right? They've been through the cost-cutting cycle. They've squeezed out all the profit they can by getting more efficient. But at some point, you have to actually start growing the top line. And that's going to require some change. And if you're going to affect change, right, think about how hard it was for those in this audience who made a New Year's resolution to keep that change going. Now we're talking about making change in a company, which could be a small group, could be 10 sales reps, 5 sales reps. You could have, 300 sales reps like Mike has in North America. Sandi, I think you've got around 15,000 sales reps throughout Dell. So how do you actually make that change occur? It's not going to happen easily. It's going to require some heavy lifting. And today you're going to hear some success stories around how you go about building a prospecting culture so that you can have sustainable, lasting behavioral change inside of your sales organization. Now, a lot of times, the questions that we ask ourselves are going to dictate the path and the plan that we go down. So going back to my New Year's resolution example, if my plan is to become more fit next year, but I keep asking myself questions like, why can't I get fit? What answers am I going to come up with? I'm going to come up with all the reasons that I can't do it, right? So as you're thinking about building a prospecting culture, you need to be able to ask yourself the right kind of questions that are going to take you down the right path. Otherwise, you're going to go down the wrong path. And let me show you some of the 1.0 questions that many of us have asked in the past. And we've been studying this for about 30 years. How can we generate more leads? So that's obviously something that we've just talked about. Generating more leads may not necessarily yield the results you're after if they don't get a phone call. How can we enforce our sales process? Many in sales are obviously always worried about enforcing sales process. How can we increase the number of sales calls? Right? So these are all 1.0 questions. But what's a different perspective on these questions that might lead you to a different answer? So how about what is a lead? How about getting agreement between sales and marketing on what a lead actually is? How can we enforce our sales process? How about rethinking how our customers are, rethinking how we're actually selling? How are customers buying? How many people in this room, in their company, have a sales process? Raise your hand. Okay, about 75%. Now, how many of you have re-looked at that sales process in the last 2 years? Wow, phenomenal. It's about 50%. So you'd be surprised. Most organizations that we find actually have it. And if you think your customers haven't changed how they buy, right, then you really need to rethink how you go into market. Because everybody's transforming right now. Everybody's in some stage of transformation. Those that are selling and those that are buying. One of the key questions that we always find people talking about is what kind of training can we provide to really build a prospecting culture? And a really different perspective on that is how can a manager increase productivity? Because we have repeatedly found over and over and over again that the single most important person in any kind of prospecting effort is not the Salesforce. Salesforce will execute based on what that frontline sales manager is going to ask them to do, inspect them to do, and expect them to do. But oftentimes the focus is really placed on that frontline sales organization, and we send them to be fixed, quote unquote. But the focus needs to be on that sales manager. Now, why do geese fly in a V formation? Does anybody know? Please.
Sculpting is one for wind.
Yeah.
So it breaks the wind for each person. Also, it's easier to follow.
Exactly. So there's a very specific reason for that, right? They're using aerodynamics to help the speed, or to help them with the speed, and they're traveling down south. All right, they're going to do the same thing up north. And they take turns in that front position, by the way. Right? It's not always that same geese that's in the front position. So they alternate rotation based on how tired that geese gets. So as you're thinking about your sales and your marketing organization in a prospecting effort, right, it's not about having everybody march down and execute the same exact speed and rate at the same time, right? Going back to the geese example, if they were all lined up in one formation flying straight down, then they would all get really tired pretty fast and it wouldn't be a very effective method. So what we have found is that there's a very specific methodology to actually leverage all the various components in your company to truly drive a prospecting culture over time. So that the most important asset is always at the front, depending on what activity it is that's being performed. And just like these geese face headwinds, all sales reps and marketing professionals are going to face headwinds when they're in a prospecting cycle. And what are some of those headwinds? So we always want to get to decision makers, the people that can, cut the check, sign the order. So getting to them is pretty hard. These are the stats. 66% of the time, these decision makers are not in the office. They get 240 phone calls a week, 143 voicemails a week, and 288 emails a week. In some cultures, that's 288 emails a day. How many people in here get more than 100 emails a day? Yeah. So how do you break through that? And building this prospecting muscle, which is the way you break through that, is something that most sales organizations have forgotten. We went through a pretty good expansion cycle in this country. And so for a while, things got pretty easy. And when it's easy to sell, you can almost take orders, right? But the world changed on everybody in October of 2008. And as the world changed, it became much, much harder to sell. but that prospecting muscle that people have built up over time simply has atrophied. It's just atrophied. And so it's a process of rebuilding that muscle in order to break through some of these barriers that are placed in front of every single one of your sales reps as they're trying to communicate with customers. And what do most salespeople do if they're given a cold calling target or a prospecting target, given the fact that they forgot how to do it? I'm sorry? They don't do it, right? They don't do it, they do it poorly, or what they'll do is they'll wait until the very worst possible time to actually do their prospecting. So if you give somebody a 50-call prospecting target, for example, a salesperson's going to do is going to wait until Friday, about noon, right? Make their dials. Say they made their dials, unplug and go home. Now, when's the worst time to call anybody? Friday afternoon, right? So they're building this self-fulfilling pattern and cycle around poor success because A, they don't know how to do it, B, they're doing it at the worst possible time. So rebuilding that prospecting muscle, again, is something that just about every single company we talk to is highly interested in working on. And there's a structure for doing so. Now, does anybody know the difference between active demand and latent demand? Active demand is when somebody recognizes that they've got interest in a particular solution. They already know, they're shopping, and they're looking. Okay? Good example of that is all those leads that were submitted to those 170 companies that didn't get responded, right? And so what happens is those people went shopping elsewhere. Now, if your active demand isn't large enough to fulfill your pipeline requirements, then you got to go and drive some latent demand. And this is identifying targets that have a need for your solution, but perhaps may not yet be aware, right? And that's where some of the heavy lifting comes in. And historically, what's happened is that training and marketing and sales and operations actually, go down their own paths and attacking both of these solutions. But there's certainly a much better way. And there's 4 groups that need to operate together in order to build any prospecting culture. It's not just sales, it's not just marketing, it's operations and training. All 4 of those organizations need to work together. And what we found works explicitly well is by creating what we call a unified selling force, where these 4 groups essentially come together and collaborate and identify a strategic mission or strategic imperative or objective that the sales and marketing and operations organizations, training organizations can all rally around. Because you don't want to try to boil the ocean all at once. You've got to be very, very specific in your efforts. Okay? Once they've all agreed on what their target metrics are, and Salesforce.com becomes the nervous system that actually enables all of this collaboration, communication, measurement to occur, then you go through a 4-step pattern. First step is obviously creating and enabling a play that's going to begin to drive active demand. So this is where the marketing organization is essentially building your MarCom, identifying segments, getting your customer lists, pulling all of that information together and loading it in Salesforce.com so that it can be properly executed upon by the sales organization. And their responsibility with operations is to cross-check all of the tools that are being loaded so that when you actually fire the gun and say go, there's nobody pointing fingers and blaming anybody for why the process may or may not be working. So you've got to form that alignment at the very, very front end. Once you start to execute that, then of course marketing is responsible for communicating to the marketplace to stimulate all the active demand. But sales has a responsibility in that as well. Because just because the lead comes in doesn't mean that anything's going to happen. And so what we've found is that a 24-hour SLA to those leads is really what drives effectiveness. A lead will actually lose 25% of its value every single day. Until after 4 days, that person will probably forget they even submitted an inquiry to your company. So sales has a clear responsibility, again, Salesforce.com enabling this entire process. But once all that unfolds, and let's say you have 1,000 customers in your total addressable market, and active demand has generated 15 or 20% of response rates from that customer set, you're not going to walk away from the other 75% that didn't respond. And that's where latent demand strategies come in. And so what we found works especially well is for marketing to now shift the responsibility away from pushing out content to drive leads, but to really take a look at that account set and help sales go through a prioritization exercise and analysis around which of those accounts should be targeted first and in what sequence and with what strategy. Okay? And then sales responsibility is to go about executing on that strategy with marketing support. And did you know that customers typically say no 6 times before they say yes? But sales reps stop at the second no on average. So and no comes in lots of different forms. No can mean not returning a phone call. No can mean no, right? Or no can be call me 2 weeks. But most salespeople stop at the second no. So the responsibility from sales here is to continue to execute in a very structured cadence in what we call a 6x6 sequence. Again, all of it supported and enabled by marketing as they're deploying SMEs into the sales cycle to help close the transaction, and as sales executes a buyer-centric sales process versus a process that might have been designed 5 or 6 years ago that may or may not be relevant anymore. And so, enough about what we have discovered. What I'd like to do is have Mike Clayville come on stage and share with us his experiences in building a prospecting culture. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Walter. And thank you all for coming in today. I can't tell whether you're here because you want to be here, you just don't want to be in the rain. How many of you are here just to get out of the rain? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, me too. Me too. No, so I'm excited to be here to talk a little bit about how we've driven prospecting culture into VMware. Right? So I have always been of the belief that prospecting is the calisthenics of sales. It's how you stay in selling shape. If you want to make sure your career plateaus in sales, quit prospecting. And the nature of prospecting is such that the more successful you are at it, the less you need to do it, so the worse you get at it. Right? And it's a weird cycle. And what you find is reps that get really good at prospecting pretty soon spend all of their time selling, and they get really bad at prospecting. So it's really important that it becomes a fundamental part of how you sell, right? So there's this notion that I call the discipline of getting things done, right? What are those things that you need to do every week, every quarter, every year, every day, and make sure you have those tight in your sights so that everybody in your sales organization get up and they know, what am I supposed to do today? What am I supposed to do this week? What am I supposed to do this quarter? What am I supposed to do this year? Because what is true, again, one of my philosophies, if you want consistently good results, create consistently good behavior. Behavior and results are tightly interconnected. And if you let behavior drift, results will drift. But what we all are looking for is always consistently good results. So it's just as simple as ensuring everybody is engaged in always consistently good behavior. So we've got some fundamental things that are part of the discipline of selling that we created on top of our Salesforce implementation. Things that are obvious, pipeline management, forecasting, those types of things. Consistently, every single week, it's done the same way, you get good at it, right? The second thing we do is, how do you handle the types of transactions you're engaged in? Right? Every transaction, every customer interaction isn't the same. And how do you separate out the consistent behaviors, isolate them, and reinforce them? Right? And you come back to this big notion, Walter started it, it's the notion of how does a customer want to buy? Start there. Right? And there's really two parts of that that I believe in. Right? There's the part of how do they want to buy and when do they want to buy? Because both are really important. So the first part of this is the discipline of getting things done, the discipline of doing all of the fundamentals right really well. Right? Pipeline, forecasting management, the calisthenics of prospecting, staying in selling shape. Right? And understanding the characteristics of those transactions, whether very small transactions and how my behaviors can support success in small transactions, or bigger transactions where my repetitive behaviors can support success in the bigger transactions. Then the next step is, you know what? I only want to sell where people want to buy. I only want to fish where there are fish, right? It seems like an easy concept, right? Only sell when people are wanting to buy. And the notion of listen to your customer and understand how they want to be sold to, but also when do they want to be sold to. One of the biggest mistakes we make in selling is we start selling when we should be prospecting, and we start prospecting when we should be selling. Understand from a customer's perspective, what are they looking for at this time, and then land at the right time with the right message. So the notion that I've got is I've got this notion that I call selling to the intersections. Every customer has some triggers that create a need that drive a buying behavior. Know those triggers. Those triggers can be documented, and you can get out of those triggers what I call a selling intersection. A time that the trigger creates a buying behavior. And integrating those throughout the Salesforce enables you now to begin to only fish where there are fish. Only sell to customers that want to buy. And you want to earn a lot of your selling capacity back. Start only selling to people ready to buy. Right? It's a really big idea if you can drive it. And then the final piece is, how do you architect success into a sales organization? And the least common denominator in every sales force is their territory. So how do you start with a territory and create an environment where success is easy? Right? A lot of times we distribute territories, we give them named accounts, those accounts hang around for a while. The longer a person stays with us, the more accounts they get. Somebody leaves, gives the good accounts to somebody that stayed, right? And you get into an environment where you're radically out of proportion, right? You've got some territories that there's no way they could ever be successful, destined for failure. And then you got some territories that there's no way they could not be successful. And what that means is you've got territory that is underperforming, and as a result, your sales force is underperforming. Right? So how do you go about architecting success into the territory? Right? And then once you get that done, it's all about watching some of the fundamentals over top. There is an important notion called discipline drift that led to the conclusion earlier today that only 5 people made it all year long on their resolution. Discipline drift is a really important concept that Salesforce can enable sales management to manage. Right? And then the second part of this is, how do you institutionalize how you sell where and when a customer wants to buy? How do you get that deeply ingrained in your sales force? Right? And then the other big question is, how do you architect success into every rep's territory? How do you give them the highest probability of succeeding? Right, so that's what we use Salesforce to do, is the transformation from selling 101, the discipline of getting things done, doing the fundamentals right, to selling 201 is only selling where people want to buy and how people want to buy and when people want to buy, to 301, architecting success in. Right? And sales 401 is where every rep only has to work 10 hours a day and gets filthy rich. Right? And that's the input. That's what we're looking for. We don't want the reps to have to work 80 hours a week. If we do the right job of supporting them, creating success, enabling them to only sell where people want to buy, making sure that we have the right level of discipline, our job is to minimize the hours they have to work and maximize their potential success. Right? So let me show you in leveraging coaching in the cloud, which is built on Salesforce and enables us to keep track of this discipline drift, some of the success we've had. Right? So we use this process worldwide. And we have, since September, created $20 million in incremental pipeline. Right? And again, it's back to the team. It's not just the Salesforce, it's the whole team that's created that. Middle chart there. You can see how it is by stage. You see that we get a lot early in the stage, but we've matured a substantial amount through the later stages of the sales cycle. And we've delivered on about 3 million of that since September. A pretty good turnaround on the pipeline. Again, it works everywhere. Customers, no matter where they are in the world, want to buy the way they want to buy. And being able to customize your selling activity to the way they want to buy works, whether you're in China or whether you're in Chicago. And then finally, you see, every week you create pipeline. It's not a blitz where you got a bunch of pipeline one week and then you flatline until you do another blitz, but it's a consistently delivering incremental pipeline every single week. It's back to that discipline of getting things done, getting into that rhythm. Again, Walter talked about it a lot. Prospecting is about muscle memory. It's about picking up that phone and being confident on that phone and executing a well-planned conversation with a customer. And that's not something you do cold. That's not something you learn Friday afternoon. That's something that every day you do it, you get better. Every single day you do it, you get better. And when you don't do it, you get worse. Right? And if you can keep that getting stuck in your head, like everybody's got a prospect. Everybody's got to constantly prospect. It's the way they stay in selling shape. Then you can support that with these tools we're talking about that creates great results. So thank you for taking some time. Sandy, would you like to come up?
Good afternoon, and thanks so much for joining us in such large numbers. Rain or not, I'm just grateful you're here. Dell, let's talk for a minute about how we developed our prospecting muscle. And you know, many people would start from the premise that they just simply wouldn't believe that Dell didn't have great prospecting muscle already, because we were in a highly commoditized industry and we had a very tactical sales organization, and we were absolutely known for our ability to execute. So what happened? This picture is really a picture that talks a little bit about the last 3 years and the sales transformation that has been underway at Dell, and the work that has been done around taking our sales organization from a tactical sales organization into a solution selling organization, and one that can focus on a much more disciplined methodology for prospecting. When we started this journey about 3 years ago, we really started it with Salesforce.com. And we went ahead and did our deployment. We introduced a refresh selling process. And I remember I was here at Dreamforce, and Walter from Baker was also here, and he was texting me saying, Sandy, I've got this great idea. I think I can really help you out, because we had one problem, and that was that while we had deployed all the tools and we had implemented the process, we weren't necessarily increasing our sales. And we were concerned about what we needed to do to take our next step. So I met him somewhere between north and south underneath in the little area, and he's showing me his little chart, and I said, wow, you know, I think this is a good idea. So we went back and we started talking to the leadership, to the sales leadership team, and they said, quite frankly, we don't really need this. You know, we feel really comfortable that this is an evolutionary piece, that you know, we're ready to go. We've got all kinds of good sales process. We've got a CRM, and really what you need to do is get the training right, because you're still training our people on product, and you're really not taking us to the next level. So we didn't stop at that. We kept working at it because in my heart of hearts, I knew that we needed to do something that was innovative and that was different. And so we continued to push our sales organization forward along this notion that we had to rethink our methodology for prospecting. And to that end, we found a small group of sales folks in our Canada team that were willing to actually give it a try. And so we went ahead and we developed a sales cadence with them. We introduced them to the methodology. We started having regular communication with them. The Baker team engaged and helped to build a playbook. And we were heading down the path very nicely. And someone raised the point, we don't really have a good solution here that we're trying to promote through this prospecting culture. So what will we do? And so, you know, we started thinking about all the different partners that we do business with today, and how we interact with them, and how we engage with them. And we engaged in a conversation with our friends over at VMware, who actually were so excited at the notion that we would go down this path that they said, if you'll invest the time, we'll make sure that your teams are certified. We'll make sure that, that you have access to all the work that we've already done on this, and we'll collaborate on it with you, because we think it's absolutely the right direction for you to be going. And we believe that as two organizations, we can create a powerhouse opportunity for ourselves. So we took them up on it, and we started down the journey. And the journey has really led us to some really great notions and some learnings. So the first piece is that we really absolutely learned that we thought our sales organization understood what we wanted them to do, but we'd not clearly put it in front of them. And in fact, during our first work, we learned that they didn't even really know how to properly use the CRM. They didn't understand how to really manage their accounts through the CRM, or what would be in it for the customer, or how they could, you know, use the solutions that we had in our portfolio to really express a differentiated and unique point of view to our customers. And so as we started down this path in this journey with VMware and with the Baker team, we began to realize that this wasn't just a simple matter of retraining our folks. This was really a matter of changing behavior, of helping them to understand exactly what our point of view was and how it was going to change the customer's environment and help them to be successful with their own goals. And the second piece that we really focused on was our whole go-to-market strategy. So we have all sorts of routes to market. And you know that you can find Dell products and services on the back of a newspaper. You can find them online. You probably have account teams that work with you as well. So you know there are many different ways that you can actually access Dell capabilities. But you likely weren't all that familiar that at that time we were launching a channel, that we were really starting to develop much deeper relationships with that channel, and we were defining where we could actually work in the market in a different manner. So this was critical because we needed to absolutely integrate our partners into the whole management scheme around how we would do our prospecting. So what did it do for us? Well, you know, first of all, we learned that you really need to embrace your strategic alliances in a way that's programmatic and that has some governance and that has some real commitment behind it. It just simply isn't a matter of who gets to pay the bill on, you know, the play of the day or the program. It really is about what your strategy is longer term with that partner and how you will bring your joint value proposition to your customers. And we learned that if we invested in the right kind of solutions-focused training and developed the coaching mentality with our sales management team, that we absolutely could change the behavior of our salespeople. And so in terms of results, we've tracked this pipeline for the past 18 months, and essentially what we saw was that it wasn't just something that, it wasn't a blip in the night, it was a continuous growth pattern that took us to a very significant win, and one that we were not only able to leverage with that initial Canadian pilot, but in our US business, and then eventually along the European business group as well. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for listening and turn it back over to Walter.
Thank you, Sandy. Okay, so we've got about 20 or so minutes left, and what we wanted to do is really give you all the opportunity to ask our wonderful guests questions about their experience, their process, how they leverage Salesforce.com in this build of the prospecting culture. Because one of the things that I can tell you is that the measurement process that you go through when you go through these plays that I just described is absolutely critical. The whole enablement cycle is critical, and if you don't use a very flexible tool like Salesforce.com, it makes your job substantially harder to execute. So with that, we have a microphone in the back, and who's got the first question? Please, Kristen.
Hello. There you go. I'm with JD Power Associates, and I'm heading up the global demand gen structure. We just realigned with the sales organization. And if you guys know anything about JD Power, it's been around for a long time, around traditional market research. The realignment is going to a more, instead of going from a syndicated order-taking report structure to a prospecting structure. And so what they have now is a bunch of people out of shape who've been going on relationships and golf memberships and country clubs kind of relationships to a prospecting culture. How do you transform people that are comfortable on their lazy lounger to that culture mentality through Salesforce? Is it, I know it's executive commitment. Is it KPIs? Is it sales improvements? Is it time, activity to Salesforce? And what kind of things can I take back to my manager and say, this is worth for others to consider?
Yep. Which of you would like to field that question?
So I'll be happy to start that question. So it starts with the first line management, right? Because this is something that, this is one of those medicines you have to take that I don't want to take it. And worse yet is, for those that have been successful, look, I have 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years of experience doing it this way. I know that continue doing this way will I'll continue to have success. Why are you telling me to go someplace else, right? So you have to make the case for change. And you have to think about making the case for change. It's one of those fundamental pieces that you have to do when you get ready to engage in change management. So you have to make the case for change. You have to explain it. You have to have a logical reason why what happened in the past won't enable you to be successful in the future. So the first thing you have to do. And then you have to overlay it with a series of tools that enable people to do it, right? So it's like, somebody that hasn't ran for several years, deciding they're going to go run a marathon, right? You can't just get up one morning and go out and run 26 miles. It won't work. You'll be really unsuccessful, right? And the same thing is true with prospecting. So you have to start by giving them all the tools that they need to be successful, and then teaching them how to be successful with the tools. And then the final thing you have to do is you have to engage in the discipline, right? And so one of the things that I do when I engage in this is I bring everybody in, set them all down in front of a table, and I ask them all to take their badge off and put them on the table. Everybody take your badge off, put it right there in front of you on the table. All right. So those of you who are convinced, after we've made the case, we've taught you how, that you still don't need to do it, just leave the badge there and walk out the door. Right? And so it's the management willing to take the next step to enforce the discipline that is one of the most important pieces of this, right? They have to be willing to step up and take charge.
Yeah, I often tell people that the deployment of Salesforce at Dell was probably more of a psychology exercise than it was a technology exercise. And I say that because we invested more time in change management principles and working to retrain and retool our sales organization than we did worrying about, the CRM. And by doing that, we ended up in the right place, quite frankly. But it was an absolutely quantum investment. And there are some salespeople today that don't assess well to the prospecting culture that we have built. but they now don't fit as well. So the reality of it is that you know, the word culture is a critical piece of it. You really have to have the lion's share of your organization shift to the new methodology before the ones that hang back don't fit anymore.
Yeah, and just to build on top of that, what we have found working with Mike and with Sandi is that the fulcrum for change on all this is that frontline sales manager. And if you can't get the buy-in of that frontline sales manager, you're never going to get the buy-in of the Salesforce, because they're the ones that have to interact with the Salesforce every single day, right? They've got to change their behavioral pattern, and they're the only ones who are really impacted and able to do so. And if you want to get that cultural shift to occur, you've got to get about 75% of your managers to buy in. Then the whole company will turn over. But it's a focus on the frontline sales manager that makes huge, huge change. Who's got the next question? Come on now. Okay, please.
Hello. I just want to ask about social media included in prospecting efforts, because when you're talking about frontline management, a lot of times it's not something that they can measure, and it's not as predictable as it used to be. So a lot of them are actually a little more resistant to saying, I don't want you to take your Friday afternoon and update your LinkedIn profile. I want you to make calls. So how are you integrating social media into the prospecting efforts?
So we've invested a lot in social media at Dell. It's a really big piece of our culture as an organization. And we have a absolutely quantum Chatter implementation now. Every employee at Dell is now using Chatter and part of the Chatter network. So it's it's pretty significant. However, you raise a very good point. Do you want your salespeople spending time filling in the forms, or do you want them actually doing the sales calls? Well, I'll tell you, I want them doing both, and they absolutely need to be doing both, because it's much more complex, and the customer rules. They've got complex issues, and they're asking for us to make it simple. And if the sales organization isn't tuned up to that and able to really deliver thought leadership, the competition comes in and leaves you behind. So there really has to be a different level of scrutiny and documentation around customers and around what they're thinking and what their different directions are, because it's changing rapidly. And I think, as we sit here this week, we've seen a million examples of that. Last year they didn't have any iPad applications because there wasn't an iPad. So if you think that didn't disrupt Dell's market, absolutely it disrupted it a lot, right?
Yeah, and I'd say the social media is, getting back to the notion, selling is, there's what I call the Darwinism of sales. If you continue to sell the way you're selling today, the market will outpace you, and you'll become irrelevant. You'll become the dinosaur, right? Social media is one of those areas where you can innovate. There's a lot of great innovation, because it's all about customer touch. The more customer touch, the richer the customer touch, the higher the probability of success, right? However, there's also the issue of scalability. So both factors have to come into play. If you allow social media to run rampant without, some consistency, systematic, repeatable processes around it, it can be a productivity drain instead of a productivity improvement.
Well, one of the ways that we're seeing social media as beneficial to this whole culture process is, the use of Chatter inside of an organization. Of course, Chatter is available to everybody. But, we've deployed some services that essentially leverage Chatter as a way to give feedback to a manager about their performance and how they're actually driving their team, and involving the manager and the manager's manager and the training organization all in monitoring that private Chatter feed, so that you're building a living, breathing coaching log for that manager, so that he can then continue to impact the performance on his own organization. His manager sees the log and how it's unfolding, and so that over time that manager is improving, and as the manager improves, the sales team is going to improve. That's going back to that same fundamental question we asked earlier, which is, what training should we provide our sales force? Well, think about how you can enable your manager to really raise their productivity. So, yes, next question. Oops, sorry, question in the back first. We'll get right there.
Thank you very much for your comments so far. But I'm curious more. We have a field sales organization at our company, and from a prospecting standpoint, do you have a couple of maybe more specific tips on CRM integration in the prospecting process, and how that actually looks as far as what tools you push out to your teams, or how they actually view the CRM for finding people and those sort of things?
Yeah, so I can speak to that. We did the mobile Salesforce implementation a couple of years ago, and that was a big move in the right direction because it took the whole sort of piece away that said I have to go to a customer and write a bunch of notes and then come home and fill it all out in my my laptop. So the mobile implementation was big, but the second piece, and I think actually even more importantly, was we did a lot of work around bringing intelligence into the CRM around the customers themselves. And we're continuing to work with companies like Dun & Bradstreet on, and Jigsaw and so on to get a better and more defined intelligence base. But that's actually a critical area, because as soon as we put intelligence into it, the sales organization became interested because it became a source of research for them. They could go and learn.
Yeah, so same thing with us, right? So business intelligence is fundamental to increasing the probability of success, right? So my job is to make sure 100% of the time when a rep picks up the phone, they get a hold of a customer that only wants to buy, right? And the closer I can get to that, from wherever I start, I'm making the right move. And so business intelligence and integrating business intelligence into the Salesforce implementation is fundamental. The second thing is integrating process. Now that's one of the reasons we love Salesforce, is the ability to take, it's so flexible that you can take, for example, coaching in the cloud, integrate it right into the Salesforce implementation, so the front end being displayed to the rep is just Salesforce, but all of the tools on the back end are going to feeding them down a standard set of processes.
Question in the front, right over here.
How micro do you have in log activities? I'm the inside sales manager. All right, there we go. I'm the inside sales manager for CTP McGraw-Hill, and one of the things that is a common gripe that I'm facing with our implementation of Salesforce is the time consumption of actually logging every activity. Do you find it effective to log every nook and cranny, or do you have like this threshold where you only want to document the activities where they've reached the client, or have actually seen a result?
Yeah, I think, again, it goes back to the sales manager to sort of define the level of detail that they, want to go to in terms of collecting information, so Mike might be able to provide a better response. However, at Dell, we went with the notion that we would perhaps pressure for more in the beginning and then let it back off over time. And that was primarily because we really felt that we were starting from a poor base of information. But moreover, we had a culture of sales entitlement. So our salespeople felt that the knowledge about that they owned the customers, and the knowledge about the customer was their knowledge, and that they didn't really have to share that, and it wasn't that important for the rest of us to know it. So we had to take some very strong positions around that at the executive level, and set the bar and be very clear that Dell owns the customer opportunity. The customer owns Dell.
Yeah. So from our perspective, I'd come back and I'd say it's a balance between adoption and detail, right? And there's no right answer. It's just a balance. But I would come back and say, what you at least have to do is trap the fundamentals of prospecting, right? And I look at it 5 fundamentals of prospecting. The first fundamental of prospecting is targeting, right? How good are my reps at targeting? So I keep track of that. The second fundamental of prospecting is making contact, getting past all those gatekeepers, right? How good are they at getting past the gatekeepers, right? The third fundamental of prospecting is earning the right to have a follow-on conversation, right? Just because you get a hold of somebody doesn't mean you're going to earn the right to have a follow-on conversation. And the fourth one is, how well do I execute that follow-on conversation? And that can be looked at by how many qualified opportunities did I get, right? Because the one big mistake we always make is we always assume, which is completely wrong, but we always assume that our inside salespeople or our outside salespeople, if they were football players, they would be both 300 pounds and run the 40 and 4.3, right? Well, it doesn't work that way. We all have our individual strengths and weaknesses. And your job as a sales manager is to understand the strengths and the weakness of every single rep and be able to provide coaching to them in the areas that they're weak. Right? You can't run the 4.3, well, guess what? You can get a jump on it. Let me show you how to get a jump on it, right? But the more and more you do it, the better and better you get. So I keep track of those fundamentals that are the key parts of understanding how to improve every individual, but it's really a balance of adoption. More important than everything, you get adoption, right? And then the second most important thing is you're enabling all of them to become better players.
Yeah, and just to add on top of that, there's always this notion of leading indicators and lagging indicators, and the lagging indicators are just going to tell you the score, right? So if you show up at a football game and the score's already on the board and the game's over, you're not going to change the score. But if you're at the game early and you can watch the game unfold and you can call different kinds of plays depending on the formation that's unfolding in front of you and how the teams are actually behaving, then you can impact that score. And that's what activity management can do for you. Now, you don't want to over-manage it, of course, and the worst people you can over-manage are your field sales reps because they already have a big S on their chest, right? They're superstars that do not want to be over-managed. So you just have to figure out what those few indicators are, leading indicators that are important to your business, and measure and manage to those. And one of the most important ones is early pipeline stage build, right? So most sales managers, when they have their pipeline and forecast meetings, all they're doing is focusing on what are you going to close this week, next month. That's maybe this quarter, but that's about the extent of it. And very often they don't focus about what are you going to focus in the outlying quarters. What are you doing to build your pipeline in the outlying quarters? And that's what prospecting is all about. So best practice that we have found is managers that actually separate completely forecast meetings from pipeline meetings. Forecast meetings, what's going to happen inside of the reporting period. The pipeline meeting is what you're doing in your outlying quarters to actually ensure you have success in the future.
And I'll just add to that, we actually drove that into our performance management cadence, that whole logic around taking the number and separating that from the how. We built that into our performance management cadence so that we wouldn't just be paying people and promoting people based on their ability to deliver the number. We were actually looking at how do they deliver the number? What do those customer relationships look like? And how are we as a company able to leverage and evolve those relationships?
Thanks. Next question.
This is all very interesting, and obviously you guys had some significant successes. But how do we know those successes wouldn't have happened anyway? Do you have any sort of business results that say, this team did it, and they got this, and then this bunch we didn't do, and they didn't move? Or is there any evidence that this is anything other than just feel good?
Yeah, I think we all enjoyed it.
Yeah, so we took the pilot group and isolated them with their peers who were operating with the same type of premise and same type of customer and so on. And we actually reduced the number of accounts that they were able to gain access to through the process. So in fact, we put them at a slight disadvantage, and then we just managed and monitored the team side by side.
And we did a similar thing, and what we found was about 20% improvement. On average, reps that were engaged in this process got 20% more pipeline built and delivered to the business over a large population.
And did that pay for the extra effort that you put in?
Oh yeah, by far. Yeah, absolutely, by far. Right, absolutely, by far.
Okay, we've got time for one more question. Yep, please.
just kind of curious if you approach one back is a little different from pure prospect.
Yeah, so the question was on win back, right? And if prospecting around win back is different than prospecting on retention, right? And absolutely it is, right? But the key isn't what you're going after, it's how you're going after it, right? And it's about getting that groove swing. It's about that muscle memory, right? So what we've set up is this systematic, repeatable process that all I have to do is substitute in what do I want to do, what target do I want to get, and I run the process the same way. And that's really what drives success across the Salesforce, is it's exactly the same thing. So I may go after an entirely new market with this process, or I may go restart customers that haven't purchased in 2 years with this process. And I've had great success in both of them, but it's really around who am I going to target, what am I going to say to them, how am I going to say it, and when am I going to say it, right? And that's what that repeatable process goes through. I've seen it be unbelievably successful at win-backs, stalled accounts, in addition to new opportunities.
Yeah, I think for win-backs, we actually do have separate teams that work on win-backs, so we deploy a strategic selling methodology behind that type of business. But I don't think that the actual cadence around prospecting changes as much as the access to various resources throughout the company may be greater in order to enhance that customer experience.
Yeah, it really doesn't matter, right, what the target is. Your tactics may vary, but the prospecting cadence applies across, white space, win back, cross-sell, upsell, all of that. And in fact, Mike, I don't know if you remember, but the first project that kind of,
absolutely,
the invention of all this was 15 years ago. Mike worked on a win-back project together at IBM. Sorry about that, Sandy, but yeah. But here we are today. So I'll leave you with this thought. So we've talked a lot about, the importance of building a prospecting culture. It clearly, salespeople are not the easiest people to change. Right? They're pretty opinionated, they're aggressive, they're high achievers, at least you hope they are, and they're very, very motivated. So you're not going to have an easy task at it. But it is certainly a journey worth embarking on, worth going down, especially when every CEO today is really focused about driving top line because they've squeezed out everything they can out of the bottom line. But I'll leave you with this quote, and it's a great quote by the CEO of Campbell Soup, which is, you can't talk your way out of something you behaved your way into. You've got to behave your way out of it. And so if you're serious about this journey, expect that it's going to take some time. There's not a silver bullet. There is a process. There is a method. There is a strategy. But embark on it with the notion that it's a journey. It may take you 6 months. It may take you a year to get there. But with the power of Salesforce.com in your hands, you do have the tools that you need to create that muscle memory, to create that lasting behavioral change so that you can truly impact the top line in your company. So with that, thank you very much.
I wanted to say hello because it looks like you're in the neck of the woods where my family lives, down in Houston.
Oh, is that right?
You're over in the Southwest. I've met one of your people outside. I was looking through Zip, and I'm like, wait, that's my family's.
Yep,
so
Sugarland, absolutely.
So they're in
well, the office is in
breeze.
right by Sugarland. But
Well, my family's grown up there.
Is that right?
Yeah, so I'm down there once or twice a year.
Oh, terrific. Well, let's definitely catch up.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks so much for saying hi. Oh, thank you so much.
Hey, how's it going?
Was that helpful?
Yeah, very good. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Let's give you a count.
Yes. Oh, great.
No, that's a nice story.
Yeah. Yeah, and what's neat is that, with the opportunity that Travis brought to us with you guys is that we already have this inventory of people that understand the virtualization space. Because, you need to have both the structure, the context, but also the relevant experience. So, yeah.
I feel that's a good question. I get the dad, how you measure it.
Yeah.
Really know it's successful.
And 2000, and so we enroll everything else since then.
Well, one of the things that you may or may not know from those emails that you're getting.
I think it's a good message, and to the extent that you can, get a lot of senior, level exposure to chat.
The account management.